Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Saving the World podcast with Luke Macmichael and Martin Rezny. Today, we're going to be talking about Andor and how it can kind of teach us things that we want to know about saving the world, how we can learn from this great show and build upon it and maybe implement some of the lessons in our lives. So, Martin, I'll let you jump right in with kind of your feelings on the show. Again, spoilers abound here, so please don't watch this if you haven't seen it already. The first two seasons, anyway, we'll be talking about. And
Yeah, I
go ahead,
don't
Martin.
really see how you could talk about this show properly especially in like a political philosophy or like futurism context and not mention the details of what it's about. Like I guess we don't have to discuss all of the like personal details or twists of the characters or something. That's not necessarily super important. But as for the themes, like for me, it was very interesting that it's a very different kind of Star Wars show, and I've seen a lot of reviews on the internet which basically describe it as like in like how it's different, like it's different in that it's good, like as opposed to the remaining Star Wars productions lately. Maybe with the exception of like the first season of The Mandalorian, or like there's some brighter spots, and obviously Rogue One, the movie that this is pretty much a prequel to, which is also an interesting way how to immediately completely limit your possibility of continuing the show. Although I guess, but it's called Andor. Andor is the name of the character. I guess that should be clarified a little bit even for people who know Star Wars, because many people confuse it with the moon Endor, or like the name. It's the name of the place where I think the third movie, which is the
Yeah,
episode 9, six,
the
episode.
six. Yeah,
I'm just
I
like
think
completely confused. Six, episode 6, right?
yeah, episode
Which
six.
were episode 6, like with the Ewoks.
Yeah,
That's the like moon with the Ewoks that where they were, and that's just like with an E, and Andor here is with an A. So there's also like a million jokes with like a and or. It's like the logical thing. So everybody is just doing memes about the name, but the what makes it even more funny is that like the character of Cassian Andor is his whole name, is not particularly memorable character, and he wasn't even a lead in Rogue One, and so everybody before the show was like, why? Like, why are they making a show about a third lead, about a prequel to a prequel or something? It's just on the surface level, it's the exact opposite of something like Obi-Wan, like the show where it's all about the memorable known characters, the favorites, and like an important point right between the main trilogies. So everybody was like, why should anybody watch this? And I think that's why many people didn't. And I'm not sure like if it picked up since then, but didn't have huge views actually compared to something like Obi-Wan. So maybe Disney will take the wrong lesson from it again, and they double down on the pointless cameos and everything. But it's basically a show that's very 70s sci-fi, very sort of 1984 dystopian future, I guess, in a galaxy far, far away. But it's very dystopian sci-fi on Earth type story, actually, even though it's on like multiple worlds. And the main character, what's interesting is that he also has no interest in being a hero, but not just normally like heroes refuse the call at the beginning, and that's supposed to be part of the hero's journey. Like he's not on a hero's journey. Like he has no intention of being a hero at any particular point of the story, and he's sort of thrown into events against his will or interest, where he suddenly, I guess not suddenly, eventually, gradually realizes that the system that he's a part of just has to be resisted, because there's no way to function properly or exist like as a normal person in any reasonable fashion in the evil empire of the Star Wars universe. And what I especially liked is the thorough depiction of the evil of the Empire, but not like the sort of a fantasy evil of evil dark lord, but the sort of mundane evil of bureaucracy. It's very like the banality of evil from Hannah Arendt type work, where if you lean into the Empire basically being, or the Imperials being the Nazis, then you can see. But you can actually, it gave me in terms of feeling of like what kind of dystopian nightmare it is. It was like an interesting catch-all of all of the dystopias of the 20th century, or like hypothetical near future, because it has this sort of future retro look in terms of like the technology, but also sort of the specific structure of the empire, or what they're doing is like the greatest hits of authoritarian totalitarian regimes. It's like you can very easily see Soviet Union in it, like especially in the secret service. There's the what are they called, like the Imperial Security Bureau, or I think ISB is the name, and there's basically FSB. That's basically sort of the, or KGB, the like sort of Russian, very Russian or Soviet style secret service. But then you have also like the authoritarian elements of like the most of the people being just like left to live their lives as long as they don't cause waves. But then you just saw how like it creepily like one step at a time, or I guess one goose step at a time, like if you're just trying to just not make waves and just tolerate the little evil, then the evil just grows and takes over more and more of your life. So overall, wonderful dystopian depiction of like I said, greatest hits of all totalitarian authoritarian regimes. Anybody in any part of the world can see any historical empire, basically any historical oppressor in there. And I think that's one of the best things on science fiction when it's done right, that like everybody can see like the sort of lesson that applies to their particular situation, because it's not specifically historic and it's not specifically defined.
What I think is one of the most interesting things for me is looking at I guess, the bad guys, the emperor, the security force, particularly the guy that got the short end of the stick, Cyril Cam, the guy that basically took the
Security, I
fall.
think he was just a lowly security detective
He
thing.
was a lowly detective, but he was so passionate about the empire and everything they did, and that was, to me, kind of the hidden message here, is how something kind of so evil and horrible as the empire, which pretty much anybody who's ever followed Star Wars can kind of agree that that's kind of the epitome of evil, how it still manages to get these kind of good, effective, loyal followers at all levels, and also the blonde girl who was kind of
Yeah,
at the
in the
higher level.
ISB, the
Yeah,
rising officer.
like those two characters were both, pretty smart, intelligent people that seemed like pretty honorable, right? Pretty decent human beings in general. I didn't see anything particularly evil about them. They both thought that they were doing what was right for the empire, to keep the empire safe and to keep order in the universe, right? So I found that very interesting, as trying to understand, how people actually get into that mindset, and how do you fall victim to that kind of propaganda and brainwashing, and even though you're a decent, intelligent, good
Yeah,
person.
I think that's like that is like a classic, very real thing that happens, and I think it's when people, to some extent, who are like their preference is law and order, who are like into law and order, so maintaining law and order, put too much emphasis on order and not enough emphasis on law, meaning that for some people order is a very high value, and that's one of those one of the values that's compatible, of course, with any legal system, or I guess legal again implies that it's more just than it is, but like any sort of bureaucracy, like any state will have orders, meaning will laws and principles by which you are supposed to achieve security or something. And but of course, a security for an evil regime is not a good thing. It's like the ultimate point is that just because something is legal, or like following some sort of rules,
Mm,
doesn't mean automatically, even if it just specifically targets people who are doing violent things, it doesn't, even that doesn't automatically make it the right thing to do, or in a some sort of moral or ethical sense, a thing that people should prefer. Because some people just would want to stamp down like any troublemaker, because like on from their point of view, the people causing the trouble are the obvious problem. It's not that like they wouldn't be analyzing why those people are causing trouble, or why what they're causing is defined legally as trouble, because then you get things like that are basically not harming anybody, like smoking marijuana or something. Like there are
mm,
many people who, there are places in the world where this is very highly illegalized, and therefore it's well, those people suddenly are defined as troublemakers.
right.
So the people whose mentality it is, who can be extremely competent or intelligent, like in terms of IQ, that's definitely even people who are like the scientists who are behind studying EQ or testing IQ and testing it, they would tell you that IQ doesn't have any necessary correlation with ethics or any particular morals, or even there are differences in personality attitudes between people who all can share the same level of intelligence. So you can have an extremely intelligent, competent person who either is that sort of law enforcement type, but in effect, it's order enforcement type, which is an important distinction. And so whoever is the governor, like it's a little bit like how it's supposed to be with the military. Like the whole point of military in most even democracies should be that there should be apolitical, meaning that they're just there to enforce the will of the people slash like the emperor slash like whatever the government is, and they're not supposed to interfere with in politics at all. So you have some people who are just like true neutrals, I guess, and who are just consider the thing that they're supposed to follow is the just do the service, like just to follow some sort of code of honor, and that's their full extent of their ethics, let's say. And then I think finally the third type is the scientists, like the most intelligent intellectual people who are collaborating in the sort of European negative sense of the word collaborating, like collaborant in German, that they are collaborating with the evil regime because of some sort of like personal ambition, like that it is the best way for them to make the best life for themselves, and they know that they will be fine, or they think that they will be fine, and they don't really have much empathy for other people.
Yeah, and I think we've definitely talked a lot about kind of good and evil in the past, and how kind of as a broad definition, good is anything that helps people become more free and have more prosperity and more general ability to choose their own path in life. And anything that takes away from that, enslaves people, hurts people, abuses people in general, that's the spectrum of good and evil, is freedom versus not freedom, and all the consequences of those decisions. So that being said, it's definitely complicated. There's a lot of gray, but one of the other things I wanted to bring up, or questions I wanted to have, is at the moment where they just formed the caper, they just stole $70 million from the empire, and they're kind of getting away. And the one kid is having his medical procedure, and the two of them, Avril Skeen and Cassian Andor, are sitting there, and the one guy is trying to talk about getting away with the money. Right? He's the kid who wrote the text on rebellion, and the whole thing. It was kind of sitting and dying, and like, okay, well, nothing else matters except the money. Let's get out of here with the money. And that was very interesting to me, that Andor was the one that kind of said no, and he didn't just say no. He literally shot the guy in the face without a second thought. And I was kind of very surprised. That kind of really caught me off guard, that Andor would do something like that. Because I mean, for all we know, maybe the skiing guy is just kind of testing Andor, seeing if he'll take the bait or something, and maybe he's actually a good guy and then just pretending to want to go away. We don't know. Like, it's kind of an interesting concept that he just shot him without even a second word, or without giving him a chance to kind of take it back. And what did you think about that scene? Was there anything there that kind of hit you hard as a weird?
I think that was a bit of screenwriting wise. I think that was a bit of a turning point for him. That was like the moment, like that signified the moment where he was sort of starting to, I believe is maybe not the right word, but like realize what the problem is. That like what is the thing that it's important to fight against, or what sort of kind of person or kind of motivation. And I think he didn't want at that point to risk being wrong about like oh, it was just like a test or whatever and you passed, or like I guess he didn't want to risk it, because if what the person was saying was genuine, which I think he assumed was or felt was intuitively, then that person would kill him if he immediately when he realized that he's not going to play ball.
Yeah.
So that was, I think, a bit of a also Han Solo moment, like who shot first
Yeah.
type situation a little bit. But also like in regards to this particular situation, I think particularly like the I guess the best term for him, like the kid who wrote the manifesto there, like the young man who wrote the manifesto or recorded, I guess, the manifesto. I think the best name that internet gave him was like a Space Hamilton or something like that. So he was
Yeah.
like basically gave the manifesto, and I think that particular character affected Andor. It is like that. That's, I think, what they were trying to communicate in those scenes,
That makes
and
sense.
the fact that it was that character's life on the line also, because he was dying, was gravely injured during the heist. So I think like it all compounded it. And also in regards to the whole heist, the best again internet name for Andor in that situation was young Stalin. Because basically what the show does is it really reflects a specific key moments in the histories of various revolutions and oppressions
Hmm.
in history. And the whole heist thing, that was very probably an intentional reference to the Stalin's function as like he when he was a young revolutionary, and his task basically was to be doing those robberies to finance the rebellion in the communist revolution in the Soviet Union. So it's that kind of character who at a certain point seems to be like sort of unambiguously a hero, but then it becomes much more ambiguous later. If like that sort of the point was that like if the person is doing something like that from like the motivation that they're doing it for really makes the important difference in what kind of revolutionary or person it is. Like because if it turns out that they just stole the money because they like having money, then the whole nature of the revolution is fundamentally corrupt at that point. It's like it's if you're trying to do the thing of do something because ends justify the means. So that I think that's a very it was very highly implied that that's the motivation for Luthen. The how internet called him the Jedi Batman or something. That he had like the super cool spaceship and a lot of money and was secretly pretending to being a vigilante basically, and he liked black color. So basically, the Star Wars Batman.
Hmm.
So I think his motivation very clearly was the whole time ends justify the means to the max. So if you decide to go that route, then you still have to be very careful to then like eventually like do the good also,
Hmm.
and not just start liking the bad means
Yeah, they
that you're
definitely
using.
employed a lot of kind of, questionable tactics. They used the Empire's tactics kind of against them. They had spies everywhere. They were literally killing anybody. They were going to kill Andor. They were trying to kill Andor. Like they're literally backstabbing their own people just to try to keep the movement going forward. So definitely, it's a very interesting thing to try to resonate or try to reason with on who's the actual good guy, who's the bad guy. Are both sides just doing it for themselves? Are both sides just vying for power and control? And is the rebellion really that much better than the empire at the end of the day if they're willing to kill their own people and throw their own
Well,
people away?
for that, I think the best video actually that makes fun of this very concept, but also philosophically analyzes it is: do you know Joel Haver YouTube channel? No, I highly, super highly, I recommend him. I can't recommend him enough because he is a genius basically, and he invented his own kind of style of animation that uses AI to pretty much like automatically like paint over recorded footage of people to make it look like an animation type. This is like a very distinct style.
Hmm.
And he has one series about well, a revolution against a galactic empire. It was very short like videos which are just super funny. And in one of those, the sort of emperor who sort of the joke of the video is that the emperor of the evil empire is actually a completely like aloof stoner who's actually pretty much a good guy. He just has no idea what's going on. And so that person like right after pretty much like inviting the rebels for like a meeting and basically saying that he's going to accede to their demands because they're right, and the empire sucks, so we should do something about it. So the rebels trick him like by teleporting him away on some sort of backwater planet and take control. And then there's like a whole scene when the rebels are like, yeah, we've won, so how are we going to set up the government? And they eventually arrive at the same evil empire that they were overthrowing just through logical progression of what we need to figure
Yeah.
out. Like, because they start with something like, let's release all the prisoners from like the space prisons, and somebody says like, yeah, even the murderers. It's just like it just like spirals down. Like, yeah, I guess we need to still to have some prisons, and it's just like basically just decide to
Yeah.
do the same thing over again. So on that level, like I do like these sorts of analyses that are actually realistic, because that's for Star Wars. It's shocking that you have a realistic analysis, a sort of look into like what revolutions are like,
Hmm.
which it's I guess super not for kids in a sense, or I guess maybe they should learn it, because like then we wouldn't have sort of idealized stupid notions about that revolutions are great or fun or something, because revolutions are terrible. Like even if you're like in this case super 100% justified because the empire is truly evil, then if like the means that you have to use to overthrow it are evil also, and you're really not sure like if you will be able to set up a functional government.
Yeah.
Which, if there's any sort of political point in the episodes 7, 8, 9, like the new three, is that they didn't manage to set up something that worked,
Hmm.
because there was still some sort of evil something that overthrew them again. So that's the hard part.
Well, I think the thing that we do have going for us today to kind of not get to some kind of dystopian future like this is the very kind of physics behind some of the biggest problems I have with Star Wars in general. Physics speaking is for one, I guess the distance, light speed, warp speed, and then the fact that they can talk to each other anywhere in the galaxy with some kind of instantaneous communication. Those are complicated concepts, obviously, but more than that, it's the concept of getting all these humans to work in prisons because they're cheaper than droids. That's something that just makes no sense to me whatsoever, because droids can make other droids, can make other droids, an infinite number of droids from asteroids, essentially, using whatever energy
No,
source they have.
it's true that if you look, the Death Star itself is assembled by droids
A
in
droid.
space. So
Yeah.
why the components have to be assembled by
Yeah, and,
people?
and I think that's the biggest plot hole of the entire Star Wars series, really, and really any kind of starfaring series, is because if you're wealthy enough to travel through the stars and you have enough energy to warp space and time, then you definitely have enough energy to feed yourself, and you definitely have enough energy to be prosperous on any planet you can set up shop on anywhere in the galaxy, or any moon base or any
Yeah,
star-shaped
no,
ship.
no, you're 100% right. Many of the sci-fi franchises, but I think it's done for the benefit of, I guess, writers more so than the realism of the scenarios. Is that it would be very difficult to write an engaging film that's actually realistic on a scale of space, because of these exponential technologies that make everything run wild by itself everywhere. And so you have Star Trek, which basically decided to forbid AI. You have Dune, which basically forbid all computers and robots. You have no, this Star Wars universe where droids are very limited. Like there's some computers and some AI, but it's pretty much analog. Like you would make like an analog robot. So it's very, very limited. And they clearly could be doing more with it. You have Isaac Asimov's Foundation, where because he did the robotics saga before, he decided to again forbid robots, like sentient machines, or actually like human-like, or I guess sufficiently dexterous machines. So that's forbidden there, and let me see what's left. Warhammer 40k. Warhammer 40k has talks about the age of technology as the dark age of technology, and their excuse why they are sort of technologically retarded is because there was a super advanced age and something happened wrong with the technology. And so it's usually like the technology was getting like to a point where we can get it, but then it did something bad, so everybody later decided to keep it limited intentionally, and that creates the scenario which is more like space fantasy usually than space science fiction, or like create specifically to create a medieval like scenario in space, because
Yeah.
that for some reason is sort of fun and interesting. But you're right, like we clearly, with what AI can do, like again, unless something bad happens with the technology like a Terminator future, then it could do, in regards to like mitigating like the need for like forced labor, it could do a lot.
Yeah. So I think, and I'm not knocking sci-fi. Like I love sci-fi. It's fun. It gives us fun things to talk about. And I love Star Wars. I was named after Luke Skywalker. So I'm a huge fan. I'd never want to knock it, but at the same time, I think it's really important for us to understand the distinctions between the fantasy and the reality of sci-fi, and how we can kind of learn from these dystopian sci-fi lessons and actually build a better world today with the prosperity we have, with the AI we have, with the technology we have, and kind of circumvent any problems that these kinds of dystopian futures might lead us to, because we have them, because we have sci-fi, we can avoid those kinds of
No,
problems.
that's why I think this is very good and important, is that science fiction is a nice way to do a like sort of a trial run in your mind on the future that you don't want
Yeah.
or do want. Like you can have utopian sci-fi, you can have dystopian sci-fi. Dystopian sci-fi specifically, like it's called self-preventing prophecies, because we have pretty much the two mechanisms by which sci-fi is affecting reality is either by creating a self-fulfilling prophecy or a self-preventing prophecy.
Mm.
So the self-fulfilling prophecy is like if you show in Star Trek that people have mobile phones, like that they can just flip it open and just talk to something, then somebody in the real world will be like, yeah, so I guess we can make it. And if physics allow it, and usually they do if they're sufficiently advanced, then we have mobile phones. Like that's exactly the story of like Ericsson phones, like the first ones, pretty much.
Mm,
So there's been some bleed through from Star Trek that if it's shown that like as if it was real, then if it can be made real, then it can be made real and can be an improvement. But then you have many sci-fi are the self-preventing prophecies, and that's more if you do Star Wars and you do them like Andor, then it's definitely a self-preventing prophecy because you're what's interesting, you're simultaneously showing how to prevent a sort of bad empire from getting really bad
mm,
or forming in the first place, but at the same time, it's showing you how to do revolution right.
mm,
So it's actually sort of a cautionary tale on like two different levels, both like to even make sure that the whole situation doesn't arise at all. But if it does, then like what does it mean to be a revolutionary who's actually doing the right thing, or maybe the closest approximation? So in this sense, like the science fiction is very useful. But I would just say to the technology saving us, this is still like a social science component, or like a political science or political philosophy component. Somebody still needs to decide what to do with the technology of all the things that are possible. I think one of the problems when scientists are doing futuristic predictions is they're not factoring in politics. They
mm,
just figure out that some technology will be possible, and therefore we will definitely do it to its fullest rational potential. And there's like a million assumptions that go into why it would be used in that way. Like you could say that some of the technologies that are possible would be outlawed
mm,
because they would be on some level too dangerous. One example, if we could develop a portable generator of insane amount of energy, which is a thing that some of the people claim that like some agencies have because they reverse engineer it from UFOs or whatever. It's just a very sci-fi thing that allegedly happens in reality. Then that if you give it into the hands of normal people, then like yeah, sure, it would like infinite energy effectively. You could be wouldn't have to work just on the basis of having energy to power everything, but
mm.
it's also enough power for a single individual to create like a nuclear explosion.
Right.
Maybe that's too much.
That's a challenge. And trying to, I mean, if everybody had a nuclear bomb and, you kind of look at this whole mutually assured destruction thing, keeping us safe. If everybody had a bomb, would we all be safe? And it's the same as the gun analogy. If every single person in the world had a gun, then, would we have any suicide gunners because if someone else would shoot them down?
I think the answer to that very quickly is statistics. The more you have of something, the more, however unlikely something going wrong is, the more guaranteed it becomes.
Yeah, and particularly where one guy unlaunching a nuke could detonate every other nuke. You get this
Yeah.
catastrophic, mutually assured destruction effect that happens just because somebody pushed the wrong button or slipped and fell and accidentally set off his nuclear device. So I agree that these
It's
types
a
of
nuclear wristwatch.
nuclear resource, these types of world destroying technologies definitely need to be very finely controlled by some kind of body, some safety body, to keep people from falling into the blast furnace and
But then how
blowing
do
up
you
the world.
prevent that safety body to not become the imperial bureaucracy?
That's exactly right. So that's why we're having these discussions. So if you try to compare Andor to today, the Empire is clearly some kind of tyrant. I mean, examples: Putin, Kim Jong Un. Depending on which side you're on, because I
I
mean,
would say like historically it was most like Soviet Union.
yeah, Soviet Union's probably the most similar. And it's a current day analysis because it's happening again today, 70 years after World War II, and it kind of happened again. We're living through it again, so it makes Andor even more important today because of what's happening in Ukraine, because of what's happening in the world. But we need to understand what tyranny is. We need to understand what an emperor looks like so that we can kind of collectively as a world say, we don't want to live beneath the thumb of an emperor. We don't want to live beneath the thumb of
Even
a
though it
tyrant.
was very nice touch that in the show the emperor wasn't specifically shown doing anything. It was really focused on the machinery of the empire and the bureaucracy.
Yeah. I mean, the one guy who's the head of the spy force is kind of, you
The
figure
highest, yeah.
the direct link to the emperor. I mean,
Mhm.
he must be having daily conversations or something, but he's kind of the proxy, I guess, of the emperor. But he seems like a nice guy. He just wants control. He's supporting the blonde over the other with the what's the other guy, the black guy that is kind of a jerk. It's always
Yeah.
getting after trying to.
Well, that's the point. That's like the worst kind of evil. It's competent evil.
Yeah, exactly. But so, okay, so back to the example. So if we can kind of just get an idea for the tyrants in our world today and kind of get a picture in our mind with how to fight against them, following Andor's example, pulling out that gun when we need to shoot the rebellious and evil people around us. In some cases, might be necessary, and it's sad to think that it might be necessary because we'd love to think that there's a peaceful, happy, harmonious way to defeat tyrants. But it may not be possible. We may have
Well,
to.
sometimes I think that's the very biblical thing. That's the saying of for evil to triumph, all that is needed is for a good man to do nothing.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to be peaceful, it could just be a lot of doing nothing as the evil gets progressively stronger.
Yeah. So I mean, to say that the war in Ukraine is a necessary evil, it's a sad thing, and it's hard for many people. But it probably is. It probably was to prevent some kind of future bigger war, or to prevent somebody. And I'm not just saying Russia, because Trump obviously had some aspects of tyranny as well. Even if you're a Trump supporter, there's aspects to what he was doing with brainwashing and kind of controlling America first mentality, controlling all the world's power from this, making America great again. So there's definitely aspects of tyranny in almost every leader, I guess. And it's up to us to try to figure out what those aspects are and how to
Well,
see it before it
it's
gets
interesting.
control.
It is interesting because in this sense, it's not a question of like left wing is right and the right wing is wrong, because clearly you have ideologies on every part of the spectrum, including some like interestingly sort of neutral centrist ones that can result in some sort of oppressive regime. Because you could argue there's like tyrannical elements even to something like European Union,
Hmm.
precisely because like that wouldn't be militaristic and it wouldn't be nationalistic, but tyranny doesn't have to be ideologically national or militaristic. It can be bureaucratic. It could be like some sort of a technocracy, like the intelligent, like the most intelligent, the most educated scientist in the highest positions of authority making all the decisions, and like I don't know, forcing people to wear face masks whenever they feel like, pretty much. And that's like you could also say it doesn't, like it's not necessarily that it has to be lethal to you, or that it has to be lethal to someone in that you would be sending armies to kill people or having, I don't know, medical death panels. Like it doesn't have to go that far, and it could still be tyranny, because it could still be somebody monopolizing and controlling somebody else's life and time, to basically tell them what they can or cannot be doing, and not just in a sense of like actually protecting people or the environment, or like not actually having laws that have a good reason to exist, but making up stuff like regulations that are just bothersome. And because it's just like somebody has a power trip, or somebody has some sort of like a highly ideological point of view on something and it's pushing it on everybody else. And because they're in the authority, they can enforce it in, if not through violence specifically, then through fines, or through like now with the example now of this sort of soft tyranny is in Canada. Actually, have you heard of Jordan Peterson's situation
Yeah.
currently with the re-education panel, or what they're trying to do with him, which sounds very socialist,
Yeah.
Soviet Union old school thing?
Yeah, I'm very familiar with his work, and yeah, I've been following it. It's at the start I was a huge fan of Jordan Peterson when I first kind of read his book. The what was it, 12 Rules for Life, I think was the thing that really got him going. I thought it was a very well written book. Kind of I implemented a lot of the same ideas in my own book, Four Pillars of Utopia, as far as trying to build paradise, strive for better. He absolutely hated the word utopia, but he used the word paradise, which to me it's almost the same word. He's just
That's just
trying to,
religious utopia.
yeah, it's just your whatever version of paradise you have. That's
That's
really
that's
all I'm going at.
fantasy utopia. Like
Yeah,
utopia is a scientific thing, and paradise is a fantasy
yeah.
ideal
So
place.
it was all semantics anyway, but he definitely agreed with a lot of what we're aiming to make ourselves better and push for paradise and strive for a better world in every way. I definitely like his concept of trying to maximize freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom to have an opinion, freedom to, share that opinion without,
No, like
being.
his, like specifically his stance, like the aspects in which I support him the most personally is well, the political ones that have to do specifically with freedom of expression, because like the current situation is just the latest in development. Like I was asking specifically if you know about the, like right now he was ordered like by the Association of Psychologists to go in front of some sort of like, to either will have to go through some sort of re-education seminar, like, or some sort of I don't even know how to call
Yeah,
it, that is of indeterminate length, like I guess until they decided it sticks
they're
or
trying
whatever,
they're trying
or
to
they will expel him.
Yeah, they're trying to basically rein him in a little bit, I guess, to keep him from causing some kind of woke war or whatever you want to call it. Because he's definitely very polarizing, and that's kind of one of the downsides, and partly why I've kind of fallen out of favor with him a little bit recently is because he's so polarizing. He's so much like Trump was, and so divisive that he makes anybody, you either hate him, you hate his guts, or you love him, and anybody in the world who loves him is your friend, and anybody who hates him is your dead, your death rival, and you just want to kill anybody who disagrees with you. And that's what bugs me the most about anyone like that. That's kind of so set in their ways, or so they believe that they're right so strongly that anybody that disagrees with them deserves to die. You
That's
know,
a well, I think in his case, there's an open question if, like, the extent to which it is 100, he is 100% genuine in how he talks about things, and the extent to which it is he's strategic.
Hmm,
Because the sort of riding the wave of polarization is a great way to become more popular and get more clicks and presumably money. So to
yeah,
the extent to which it is, like, my main problem with that is, on the other side, my main problem with people who are these sort of proponents of free speech, like, sometimes it looks like they are being disingenuous about that aspect of it, and I don't like people who are promoting something disingenuously, especially when it's something that's legitimately important, which is free speech, which should be promoted genuinely for genuine reasons.
yeah,
And from that point of view, like, then regardless, even like it's similar with the deplatforming Trump. Like, it's this sort of open question of a kind of tyranny where some sort of political authority would be deciding who gets to have free speech in the public sphere and who doesn't. And the debate, of course, there's some sort of reasonable element or aspect of the debate of, like, there are, like, in Europe, for instance, is the hate speech, especially if you're, like, promoting Nazism, is generally banned, and
yeah,
nobody in Europe really has a problem with that. So maybe there is an element of, like, banning some kind of speech, or like you're not supposed to be shouting fire in a crowded theater, like,
yeah,
unless it's actually on fire. Like, you can be causing damage by speech, and in those cases where it's judged that you could be causing a lot of damage, you could make some sort of argument. It's just that if you get it to a point where a scientific group of people, which is the Association of Psychologists, would, for ultimately political speech reasons, would be threatening to expel a scientist, unless they go through some sort of re-education.
yeah,
And, like, you're like fulfilling, like, a lot of check marks on this sort of 1984ism
yeah.
of that situation.
It will be interesting to see where it goes. And I definitely feel for him a little bit as far as I think he should be free, but at the same time, free to incite violence or free to incite this division is definitely a gray area. It's a complicated area. If he's going to be inspiring Nazis, inspiring, white supremacists to go and fight for him, to fight for his freedom, to
But
say what he wants to say.
it is difficult. Like, it's similar to, for instance, like, there was this case of what if you have movies like Batman movies or Batman comics more generally, and there's obviously a lot of violence in them, and then somebody really likes the Joker, and there's been even, like, the recent very good film about the Joker called The Joker with Joaquin Phoenix, and it's a great film. The main criticism, or almost the only criticism of it, is like, hey, maybe you're glorifying Joker a little bit too much, and maybe that's not great. And then there's a person who thinks they're Joker, and they in real life shoot up a cinema.
Yeah.
So then the question is like, should Batman comics be banned?
Mhm.
Like, it's like there
Well,
is some sort of legitimate debate to be had, but it's not quite that easy. And I think most worrying trend about the recent tendencies of censorship in global media were pretty authoritarian, in that they were siding with the government and were aimed exclusively against political opponents. And then it almost doesn't matter how justified you feel in those individual instances, because then it feels like that the people doing the censoring for the greater good, of the public good, presumably, they are starting to look disingenuous.
mm,
Because again, they could have be doing it genuinely. They could be doing it genuinely.
mm.
But if they're not doing it genuinely, which is a distinct possibility, then that's another of those, like, slippery slopes to some sort of tyranny.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the key takeaway here is to ask the questions. There's not it's a complicated, wicked question, to try to find that gray area and what's right and what's wrong and how much free speech is too much free speech and when does it lead into hate speech or divisive or war speech or whatever you might want to call it. And but the key is to talk about it, ask questions, and figure out for yourself and figure out for your friends and family what is a good level of speech, and how do we help the world through the words we use, and how do we not incite horrible atrocities, let's just say. How do we prevent atrocities by the words we use, and the types of speech we have and the types of debates we have. It's not simple, but it's important to talk about, and that's why we're talking about it. And it's fun to kind of think about, and think about how we can learn from all these people like Jordan Peterson, and like the events around him. How we can
Or
learn.
Cassian Andor.
Cassian Andor, obviously, we're talking about today. Cassian Andor, back on topic, and the whole empire. How we can learn from the good people in the empire and what they're trying to do, and how we can take our role in today's society, because there are empires in the world today, of various degrees and various levels of influence, and it's not unthinkable that within 20 to 30 years, one of those empires could take control of the entire world by
And
a
build a Death
variety of means.
Star.
Yeah, and
Although it's
create.
Death Star would be kind of silly as long as you only have one planet.
Yeah, it'd be more like some kind of chokehold on all our resources in some way, and essentially enslaving the entire human race to the 1% of super elites, and the rest of us are essentially used for our labor because we're cheaper than robots.
Well, what I did like, though, on a symbolic level, I think the point of the prisoners building, because ultimately the sort of scene at the end shows that they were building components for the Death Star.
Hmm.
So if you were just trying to be the kind of character, which I think was the Andy Serkis, like the foreman in the jail.
Yeah,
So you just want to get through it. You just want to keep your head down, just follow doing what you're told and stuff. Then not realizing that you're building and helping build an engine for literal destruction of worlds. So maybe ethically you should probably rather try to kill yourself than continue working on it, if you think about it. So
yeah,
it's sort of how the regime are just like following orders, or just like keeping head down. You're just playing into the cards of
yeah,
the tyrannical regime, and you're helping it become more entrenched. So like the space Hamilton said, it's like freedom is like a spontaneous idea that like it doesn't have to be taught, and like acts of resistance are happening all over the place without instruction,
yeah,
constantly. And it's really important to, at every instance you can, exert any resistance that you can, because ultimately it will amount together to enough to break
yeah.
the regime, and it won't be obvious like what will be the last straw.
Every single question is a step in the right direction, I think. Inquiry is the answer is another common phrase that I hear. And it's just one question at a time, one answer at a time, and just continuously progress towards better, progress towards more enlightenment, more joy, more freedom.
Sure,
Not.
like that's something that you probably should be doing, so that it doesn't get as advanced as in the situation of Endor, because at that point, that there's a point at which arguably some level of like violent resistance is necessary, even though it's also interesting and a bit like risque in the context of like post 9/11 United States, where in the current paradigm, it's sort of a the language for describing people who are the resistance in the Star Wars is terrorists.
Hmm,
And that's like the ideal framing for the tyrannical regime, to clearly mark every person who's resisting in any way as basically enemy of the state, and to then send the competent, honor-driven or order-driven people to just get rid of those pesky terrorists. But then like terrorism, I've never liked that term. Like back when I was studying political science at the university, and it was even more on topic then, because it was closer to 9/11 and the all the wars were ongoing. So it was talked about a lot, but I've never seen a satisfactory definition of the word terrorism.
yeah, it's
Because if, however you try to define it, the state itself who's waging a war against terrorists is a terrorist. Like you can't define it in a way that excludes empires.
yeah, it's very synonymous with freedom fighter, right? Terrorist and freedom fighter are basically interchangeable in almost every case, depending on what side you're on, right? And it's just every
Although,
terrorist that.
although there was a great joke against the term freedom fighter, I think it was George Carlin's joke. Like if firefighters fight fire, and some other kinds of fighters fight the thing. Like, so what do freedom fighters fight?
They fight for
Yeah,
freedom.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's just, but that was
Yeah,
just Carlin's jokes were
that's good.
great linguistic jokes. They just found a way how the language doesn't make sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, language
But
is
but yeah, it's like the whole point of view, and that is sort of in the security studies and in geopolitics. The point of view on terrorists is that like it's a point of view issue.
yeah,
Like one person's freedom fighters are another person's terrorists
right.
because those are the same people. It's just how you're viewing the goal that they're trying to accomplish. Because it is also universally assumed that their methods will be icky, that they will be using violence and killing people. It's just you wouldn't say that the people resisting Nazi Germany were terrorists,
Yeah.
even though the Nazi, like if they had the term, then the Nazi leadership would be calling them terrorists. They just had different swear words, like
Yeah.
they're Jews or communists or whatever, and that's why they're bad.
It's definitely worth noting that, the pacifism types of rebellious, like Gandhi, and some of the Jews and Nazis in the Nazi
Or
age.
Nelson Mandela also to a large extent,
Yeah, and those
or
are
Václav
definitely
Havel in the Czechoslovakian transformation.
there's quite a few examples, and those are definitely arguably some of the most influential, examples of rebellion, peaceful rebellion.
Or you could say Martin
Yeah,
Luther King also.
yeah. So we have a lot of good examples, and I guess that's something we definitely could advocate for here is the peaceful rebellion of kind of pacifist. What was it called with Gandhi? He didn't cooperate. Passive, non-cooperation or something like that.
It's well, there are different terms for that. Is civil disobedience is one
Civil
of them,
disobedience.
or passive resistance. Like there are many
Yeah,
terms by which you can call it. Usually, what they have in common is basically some sort of a civil rights movement.
yeah.
There's an oppressed group that I think the best. Also, another term for that is. Have you seen some movie with Tom Hanks? And what is it called? It's called. Something with a bridge. It's based on a real event and Bridge of Spies. Right, Bridge of Spies with Tom Hanks.
I haven't seen
If
it.
you
No.
haven't seen it, I highly recommend it.
Hmm.
Bridge of Spies is based on and very closely based on real historical situation from the Cold War, where there was some sort of a mutual, like both sides captured some spies or people, and there was some sort of an issue of a mutual exchange of the prisoners, so something to that effect. And Tom Hanks is basically a lawyer in there, and is the only person in the whole situation who has any principles, and he's really trying to just like do justice
Hmm.
in that situation, and but nobody really seems to be interested in justice, both in like on the American side and the Soviet side. That's
Hmm.
very interesting. And there's a whole like that's a Soviet concept, or let's say Slavic concept, of a standing man. That's sort of like the best form of resistance against the violent empire. Standing man is a person who like you can like approach him as like the servant of the sort of tyrannical regime, and you can like punch him, beat him up, like throw him to the ground, and he will stand up. Like he won't resist, like he won't fight you back, but like every time you get him down, he just get up again.
Hmm.
And then that's the kind of a resistance that's very dangerous to the regime, because that's pretty much like a proof of like my point of view on power. Because the ultimate in political science, the ultimate, or social science, the ultimate view on power, the definition is that it's for states, it's a mandate on violence, so, or authority to use violence is what power is in political theory. My problem with that is, if you have to beat someone up or else they won't do what you want, then it's because you don't have power over them.
Hmm.
Like there are different, more important, more valid forms of power, and the standing man example is an example how the violence is not really a power, because there are things that are more powerful than the violence, that are clearly more important than right.
Yeah.
That if the people wield them, if that that's why I think the peaceful protests often work to that extent. Or it sort of depends, like how many people you get. Like if it's two people against a country of 400 million, then like good luck. But
Hmm.
if it's a million people in a country, or like in Czechoslovakia, was like 4 million people in a country of 10 million people,
Yeah.
then then they can't all just be imprisoned. They all can't all just be beaten up. And so if they just refuse to cooperate, that's enough. Because then it's just it's a bit like in economic situations, like a bit like strike.
Yeah.
So basically like a sit down strike. So it's a situation in which, if you can't really, well, like the response to which often being sending police to beat up the people who don't want to work. So the thing is, like, if you can tolerate like being threatened by violence, which implies that it will be used sometimes, but if you're like sort of willing to sort of ignore it, and just do not cooperate, just resist,
Hmm.
then the tyranny can't really work. The
Yeah.
tyranny works only if the fear is working.
So that's definitely an interesting difference, to the whole rebellion empire of fighting back. It just kind of, there wasn't really much of that peaceful resistance in Andor. So it's
A
kind of an
little bit,
interesting,
like when they all show up at the like they eventually ended up in a fight, but when they
right,
show up to the funeral,
at the funeral. So it started
that
that
would be
way.
that would be an example of it.
It's an example how it started, and had they not erupted, like, it's kind of interesting how the dead woman called them all to action. That's kind of what, it's almost like she
Yeah.
was waiting. It's like, I don't want to leave. I want to die so that I can inspire the rebellion with my final
Yeah,
death
I
word.
especially liked how she was turned into the brick, and the brick was used to beat up the Imperial soldiers. That was
Yeah,
very symbolically like nice touch.
yeah,
Or the person on the tower with the hammer bell, how he just kicked the Empire soldier off the tower down when they tried to stop that. So it was like a lot of nice little symbolisms. But like with the fighting, like once you're attacked, like as a group in that situation, like then it's clear that some fighting will erupt probably, but the whole idea of like you're forbidden to do something but you do it anyway and let yourself be attacked, that's a fundamental tactic of the peaceful resistance.
yeah. And I think part of the peaceful resistance is better if it's all kind of, I guess, publicized. If everybody knows that it's happening, then more people can kind of join in versus it
Yeah,
being
because
up
that
in the
was it
ground.
ultimately what broke the regime. The last act of resistance that broke the regime in Czechoslovakia was when there was a peaceful protest of students and police was sent to beat them up,
Yeah.
and that's the point where the rest of the country was like, nah, we're stopping this.
Yeah. It inspires
So that's
people
how
to,
that worked.
yeah. Once you can actually see clearly, that's tyranny, and everybody just doesn't want it anymore. We're choosing, and I do firmly believe that a vast majority of people in the world, maybe 99% plus, are good people at heart. You might have 1% tyrants out there, 1% psychopathic tendencies, maybe less. But the vast majority of people, when given all the information in the best way possible, will come to a pretty good decision and will make the world typically a better place from the decisions they make because they're
Yeah,
good people.
and that's why the number one tactic of the tyrannical regimes is to divide and conquer, to either create subdivisions among the people to fracture them for pointless reasons, and or again, and or like the show. So that's the kind of joke that would be all in the memes on the internet. So and or in the situation, what the empire would do is to isolate people, to create a sense that people are isolated individuals, so they don't understand that they are the majority.
Yeah,
That if they all acted together, it would be enough.
excellent. Great. So thanks so much today, Martin. It's definitely very interesting. I'm looking forward to season two. So we're up to season one. I think we have a year or two before season two comes out, but it'll be interesting how they wrap it all up. I'm definitely curious on how the Senator Mothma, what's her name,
Mon Mothma.
Mon Mothma will kind of tie into. At some point, she must break free from Coruscant and become the leader of the rebellion, right? Because that's where she is in Rogue One. But I imagine Luthen must die. What do you think? Does he die in
Probably,
season
like,
two?
but he's being, I think, set up for ultimately doing some sort of sacrifice.
Some kind of martyrdom, because he's not in Rogue One at all, right? So he's
Yeah,
definitely,
I think it will be some sort of like a point of redemption for him. I think, like
yeah.
either that or he would turn dark, and that's why he will be killed. It's either a redemption or anti that.
He was pretty dark at a few points, so it's going to be interesting to see how they wrap him up. And then, of course, the Vel Sartha, the other rich girl that was with Andor, we'll see what happens to her. She's
I guess
another
like
kind of,
some of them could just may not have been involved in the final mission. The people who died during the Rogue One, so there could be if there is a spin-off or continuation of the show, it could
yeah.
be with the characters that are part of the show now, but were not part of the mission from
Yeah.
the movie.
Who is a final thought? Who's your favorite character of the whole thing? Who would you most kind of connect to yourself? Who do you think?
Those are two different questions.
Okay,
Like
yeah,
I oftentimes like villains
yeah,
and don't necessarily connect with them,
yeah.
but I guess it's kind of both in this case. I did quite like Luthen
Hmm.
because I like Batman. It's really this sort of person who's like on the edge of darkness and has like fundamental decisions to make. I think it's like I like the character the most, not necessarily because it's most relatable, but because it's very interesting to me. Like that kind
Hmm.
of character is very interesting. Although I have to say I didn't expect that Mon Mothma will be quite as interesting
Yeah.
she is in the show also.
I was thinking the same thing. Mon Mothma started off a little kind of weak and kind of pathetic, it seemed, but then as a developed her character, she definitely kind of built into her own. As far as
Yeah.
I like the concept of her being, well, it was an interesting concept of her and her husband, right? The whole culture around, I don't trust my husband. He doesn't know anything about this. Don't let him know anything. He'll turn me in. That
So
was
so
interesting.
who was your favorite character?
I think I got to go with the kid that wrote
Space
the
Hamilton. Yeah.
Space Hamilton. Karis Nemec, his name. I think he kind of definitely fit with me. That's the role I'd like to play, even though I probably don't have the words to put it together. But that's kind of the effort I'm trying to do with this whole Five Pillars of Protopia, is just to
Yeah.
write the.
Hopefully, I guess you don't hope you're not going to get crushed by a ton of money.
I hope not. I hope I don't die in the early stages of the rebellion. I hope I can
It's
live
like
to
you
see.
raised so much money that it all collapses on you, and that's how you
Yeah.
die.
But he was very inspiring, I mean, to me, and I felt like he was kind of the most pure character
Sure.
pretty much in the whole show, really. Like he was kind of doing it for the right reasons, I thought, very strongly. And the way that he kind of accepted Andor kind of right away, he's accepting all help from all angles. He was kind of very non-judgmental and non kind of like, I didn't see him as kind of an angry, vindictive guy at all. He was just kind of trying to push the world forward for kind of altruistic reasons. So, and
No,
he
no, that's
ultimately,
like 100%. I also was shocked at the level to which he was actually doing philosophy. I didn't expect to see or hear actual philosophy in Star Wars because that really hasn't been, even in the first three movies, like they didn't get to that level of analysis. But like the moment you said that he immediately accepted Andor, he basically philosophically justified it immediately as he was like sort of talking to himself about it. In that, like you have to use all the means available to you to
yeah.
fight, even though he personally is doing it for the ideal, literally reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would have loved to see more of him. I think that was partly too, the
Yeah,
brevity of it kind of made it almost more kind of special in some
yeah,
ways,
yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, no, no,
Um,
that's clearly they clearly set him up to be extremely likable character to make his death very impactful.
yeah, and like he's essentially the father of the rebellion, on a small level. And he was just a guy, just a random guy, no real power or wealth, just smart enough to write, and write this thing that inspired a whole
Yeah,
generation of people.
yeah, because in the sort of interesting also that's more of a sci-fi concern in the Star Wars universe is also interesting because it's a contrast of like, so what can non-magical, non-Jedi or non-Sith people even do
Hmm,
in the galaxy that's a kind of power that can do anything, affect in any way like the greater levels of power in
yeah.
that universe. And
Oh, I think I lost you there for a sec. You there? Nuts.
example of
There
like
we go.
the kind of power that just a normal person can still have is just the power of conviction. It's really like shown how that is effective because he inspired other characters or other people to do much more. And in that universe, like you don't have an infinite supply of Jedi's, and specifically at this point because most of them were killed, but also almost no Sith really to be everywhere in the galaxy because of that's stems from the nature of the evil to you just destroy all potential competition, but then you don't have the numbers. So if somebody convinces a sufficient number of like the little people, which I guess is sort of a metaphor even for the real world, if you just like convince a sufficient number of regular people, then it like doesn't matter that you have a nuclear weapon. It's nothing. If you're the tyrannical emperor, it's nothing that's going to save you against just regular people.
Yeah. Great. So again, yeah, a very hopeful story in some ways. Very a lot of lessons, and of course, we know the rebellion eventually wins the war in episode 6. So they're kind of building towards it,
And then
and
probably also loses or still is fighting it in episode 7, but that's
yeah,
another point for
that's
another
another 20 or
day.
30 years later. So it's a cycle, the cycle of life, Lion King style. But the fact that we always have hope, and we have hope of a better world, and we hopefully will continue to progress, and hopefully we don't have to go through these infinite cycles, that we can slowly progress towards betterment. And our generation definitely has it better off than any generation ever before. So I like to think that it's possible that we don't repeat the same cycles for eternity, and that we can actually learn from this and continue to build and
Well, I would
Find that
say that
protopia.
specifically in relation to the current situation, I think it's already evident because I'm also myself, as you know, a proponent of like trying to figure out like cycles of history one way or another. And one of the cycles is that there's been a specific amount of time that has passed since the Second World War. And so it's a bit of a like a mirror image of the same situation, and sort of eventually came back again cyclically. And but it's interesting that it's not the same. Like it's interesting that the sort of when you had Nazi Germany starting to make its first moves, which was again attacking Czechoslovakia. I'm not sure why Czechoslovakia is always a point of comparison, but it really is in this case. And what the world did, because Czechoslovakia had allies like France and Britain, and they basically decided to give up on Czechoslovakia, and in the was called the Munich conference on through the Munich Treaty. Czechoslovakia was basically told to give up and surrender to Germany, and Germany and to Czechoslovakia surrendered because it had no international support. And so Germany just took Sudetenland, or basically made the Czech lands into a protectorate, and thus absorbed the whole quite significant Czech and Slovak industrial production.
Mm.
So became stronger and more confident and continued
Mm.
in the sort of further conquest. So in this situation, you had Ukraine, which again, a Slavic country attacked by a stronger neighboring country, and again, without any apparent chances of resisting. But this time, the international alliances worked.
Yes.
So this time, the backing countries from the West decided, no, 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 we will help the country resist. And so it quickly turned into a quagmire that immediately stopped, and probably for the foreseeable future, completely exhausted Russia to a point that it's quite inconceivable that they would be able to wage any further campaigns. And
Mm.
it's like some people would say, well, it's not comparable. They didn't have like an imperial ambition to conquest other lands, but this is already not the first step. They've already annexed Crimea, and they've already did something like this. And I think in Georgia, there was like a couple of states in which they've already done this, and it was very easy for them to do, and it immediately worked. And so the Ukraine again became another target. So I think it is comparable on this level. Maybe they don't have ambition to like conquer the whole world like the Third Reich did, but in this case, I think it's a bit of a mirror, but there's a lesson learned, I think, in
Yeah.
that whole situation.
I'm definitely hopeful that we can kind of stop World War III before it happens. I'm very hopeful that like let's call it a mini World War III, because the whole world's already involved. We just haven't completely fully committed to it yet, but
Yeah,
we're
but
all
because
kind of
like yeah,
involved.
what you're saying is exactly what is the goal. The goal is to keep it in Ukraine and then not let it move anywhere else.
Yeah. And Russia's, in some ways, we have to scare Russia enough that they don't allow it, with the whole threat of mutually assured destruction, that we never really have in World War I and World War II. We got mutually assured destruction on the table. It's been there for 70 years. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah,
And
that's another good example of the historical progression,
yeah,
because at some point you get nuclear weapons and everything's different forever from that point forward.
yeah. So that's the goal, is to just get out of this mini World War III as smoothly as possible, with more knowledge and more progression, and continue towards a new epoch for humanity,
Yeah, so that we can have some Star Wars in the future.
so that we can continue to build our spaceships and have prosperity beyond compare.
Although, how boring would it be if it wasn't Star Wars, but if you made a movie like Star Prosperity or something, and it was
Star
a story
peace.
about how we're just fine in space everywhere?
Yeah, well, there's still lots of action. There's still emotional struggles, and there's still relationship struggles. We all
So it
have.
would be either a sitcom, or it would be like a telenovela. Yeah, you could do that kind of thing with it.
Perhaps, the whole concept of romance in space,
Oh,
romance in
yeah,
space.
right.
There's room, and there's room for excitement anyway in any kind of utopian, protopian world. We're going to use the word protopia going forward. So it's
So you
exciting.
could try to like quickly explain it now. If like what
Yeah.
is Protopia?
So protopia is just progressing towards utopia in a nutshell. And what it just means that we're constantly trying for better. We're constantly trying to progress the world, have more freedom, more happiness, more prosperity, little by little. And we know utopia means no place. It's kind of got this stigma with it. People get very defensive when you use the word utopia. They get angry. It's not a bad word. It's just the concept of what it means is different to everybody. So protopia is just the concept of progressing towards whatever version of paradise you aspire to. and helping us all to try to get there together is really the goal of creating that new word. And that's what we're all about here, saving the world, spreading the knowledge of what protopia is and how to get there. And with our 5 pillars that we'll talk about, and we have talked about in many other videos, the 5 pillars of protopia.
So, I guess we talked a little bit about it before. So, what will we review next time? Because we want to make this a bit of a regular occurrence every month. Try to dedicate 1 week to reviewing some sort of a fantasy or sci-fi property.
Yeah, I would like to do Alice in Borderland myself, because again, it's a very, watch it if you haven't watched it yet, but it's a very kind of mind-blowing kind of scenario. Just trying to understand it at first is part of the goal, but then once you kind of understand it, it opens up so many avenues for what it means to be human. So that's kind of my vote, unless you want to do something else. Watch it.
Then I just wanted to make it clear to potential viewers. So if anybody's watching this, we also definitely accept recommendations. So if there's any show that you would want us to talk about, definitely leave a message in the comments.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us today. Any final comments on Andor that you'd like to leave the audience with as we get ready to sign off?
Well, I wanted to do another and/or joke, but I couldn't think of anything quickly enough. So it's just a good show. Just everybody should watch it so that Disney is motivated to make more Star Wars like this, because it's great.
Go to our website, savingtheworldtogether.org, and/or help us in any way you can.
Nice.
To spread the message of saving the world and how to build a better world together, from learning from these great sci-fi stories and asking the questions about what it means to you and what type of person you want to be. Thanks so much again. And that's us, Luke Macmichael and Martin Rezny at Saving the World Podcast. We'll see you next time. Thanks.